Okay, in this segment, we're getting towards the end, and we're going to go over the overarching idea, which is the claim made by feminists that since they did all the work in the 1980s, that they deserve some sort of deference now. But we're going to get into the whole idea as to whether or not it's actually helped the LGBT demographic in general, and whether or not it's helped gay and bi men directly. And also, we're going to get into the modern social justice ideology a little bit, which is what modern feminism has evolved into. But anyways, it's not debatable whether or not feminism has helped lesbians. By the time the third wave had hit its peak, feminism was pretty much the dominant school of thought within the rainbow, largely because lesbians were the plurality in the aftermath of the AIDS crisis, and most lesbians at that point were some degree sympathetic to feminism. This ranges from the I'm a feminist because I'm a woman and equality to the Anita Sarkeesians and TERFs who want social supremacy. It's basically a continuum of how political and how much of a dick you are willing to be to the people you disagree with. Lesbians are the dominant demographic within feminism, mostly by default. They were the one demographic of women that had real issues up until recently, the main issue being with marriage equality, adoption laws, and to some level housing and workplace discrimination. And I'm actually going to have a short tangent on the workplace discrimination against LGBT people in states that haven't extended their non-discrimination laws to include us. States that lack these protections are largely right-to-work states, meaning labor laws can be easily abused. For the record, I lived in Nevada, which has extended its non-discrimination laws to LGBT people. Employers in Nevada can abuse vanilla laws like dealing with breaks and overtime pay. It could also take years of abuse before there is enough evidence to bring a case against a company. If LGBT people were being abused, it's very likely that no one would notice because there aren't many of us, not to mention that a lot of these states tend to have less resources to even bring these sorts of cases into court or provide other LGBT-centric services. But back to the main point, from what we can observe with how fourth wave feminism treats gay men, the current wave isn't helping at best, and it is very demonstrably making things worse. The current line from feminism is that gay men are either privileged, which means they are universally deserving of disdain, or they are the prime example of toxic masculinity and deserve a lot of social derision. This is not to mention the problems with depression, the lack of community, substance abuse that were mentioned earlier, and from the organizations that we are investigating in the earlier segments, it seems that LGBT orgs are willing to raise money from wealthy gay men, allow gay men to run these organizations, do most of the heavy lifting while not getting resources for their issues, and the social media world derides them as being toxic. And with the LGBT movement being completely absorbed into intersectional feminism, which is itself a subset of Democrat politics, the issues faced by gay men, bi men, and even trans people, and some lesbians won't get helped too much by the movement or even some of the organizations that are supposed to be helping us. As previously mentioned, the movement is trying to erase gay, bi, and lesbians and collapse them into one queer identity. This leads us to the next question, which is what can we do to help the parts of the LGBT demographic that are being left behind? The easiest answer is that we need to leave the movement portion of LGBT behind. As much as the political talking heads want to threaten us with the idea that if we so much as left the movement or stopped being political or were just less political, we would regress back to the 1940s. But with the way national politics has been going over the last few years, that isn't likely to happen. The religious right is less powerful, especially in the wake of Trump. Don't get me wrong, they still exist on the local level and in some state levels, but on the national level, they have lost a lot of power and a lot of importance lately. They were so weak in 2015 that they couldn't even put Ted Cruz over the edge when he did everything he could to court them, and the quote-unquote new right doesn't seem to want to have a large religious faction, even if they say they are for quote-unquote traditional values. Not to mention that the alt-right is just being inflated to serve as the spoil to the left, even though 99% of the population rejects everything that they are selling. For example, an Atlantic or Salon article about the alt-right will get viewed by more people than literally anything Richard Spencer will make. And for example, about 25,000 or so people follow Richard Spencer's YouTube channel, whereas about 800,000 people follow Salon on Facebook. What does need to be done, to get back to the point, is that LGBT people need to leave the movement and start building their own apolitical subcultures so they can have community and a fulfilling life. This is something that can't be done with the existing movement or community organizations because they have largely existed to be political, and we have evolved to a point where we don't need a political movement to survive anymore. We are entering into a phase where we need to build community organizations that provide community building activities like group and youth programs, workshops, potlucks, social support groups, and other such activities, similar to what the San Francisco LGBT Center does that we profiled earlier in the program, but one that takes the very political stance of being apolitical. The LGBT demographic still does have problems that are very specific to us that need to be handled by other LGBT people. Also, I do want to make a quick point that men, women, and trans people should be encouraged to have their own groups and organizations. At this time, gay and bi men don't tend to have groups outside of HIB support groups, bars, and the occasional choir, and there are separate groups for lesbian and transgender people of all different varieties, a lot of which are around San Francisco and other large cities. That being said, since the LGBT movement isn't really going in a constructive direction anymore, it's time that change happens. It's been nearly 50 years since the modern gay rights movement has started, and the future they are fighting for has finally come. People by and large don't care if people are gay, and what few parts of society that don't like gay people are slowly coming around. It's time that we start building communities separate from the movement and go about our lives like our forebears fought for. A political movement is divisive at its core, and our national politics are changing, and it's time that we adapt and become actual communities instead of a movement that is masquerading working as one. The politics will continue. The LGBT movement is a full franchise of the Democratic Party. They will still do their thing, but it's time that we, the majority, for our own sake, build actual community. We need it. We have our own problems, and we need to work on our own solutions. This is a mostly humanitarian reason, not to raise another group of activists. The LGBT community around San Francisco can raise $3.5 million in individual donations. We have and can raise the money. We just need to have the will to build something new, to allow ourselves to evolve as we did in the past and will in the future. The question is, do we let things boil over and allow what has been built to be destroyed because it's become irrelevant and hurting people rather than helping them? Or do we build something that provides more than the occasional game night, youth group, or outreach for various social ills like substance abuse that attempts to build community like churches used to and largely still do? The longer we ponder this question, the larger the backlash will be, and if social media is anything to go by, the backlash will start from within the movement rather than from outside of it.